Hi, thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Jessie Peterson. I'm the Director of Education here at SunRay Construction Solutions. SunRay secures $10 billion annually for GCs, subs, and suppliers. We are a national construction document service. Today's webinar is conducted by the incredible Emily Pendleton, a Texas construction lien law expert. Today's webinar topic is a contractor's, subcontractors, and suppliers step-by-step guide to getting paid. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the fabulous Emily Pendleton.
Thanks so much, Jessie. I am working on switching to the next slide. Let's see. All right, so yeah, throughout today's presentation, as I walk through our steps to getting paid, please feel free to drop any questions that you might have as we go through this in the chat. Okay, so protecting and preserving your right to payment in Texas is really going to largely depend on the type of construction project that you're working on. And so you've got kind of four general different types. You've got your commercial private project, you've got your residential private projects, and then you've got your state and your federal public projects. And so on your state and federal public projects, these types of projects have to be bonded. And so those sorts of the steps you need to take in order to preserve your right to payment as it relates against the bond and the surety who issued that payment bond are very different as compared to what you need to do in order to protect your rights to payment through a lien, which is going to be filed more commonly on the private projects, commercial and residential private projects. Now, commercial projects can be bonded sometimes, in which case you'll want to follow bond claim procedures there as well. Today's presentation, because there are different deadlines depending on whether or not you're perfecting a bond claim on a public project or perfecting your right to payment with respect to lien claims on the private side. This presentation is going to be focused on the commercial private projects where you need to perfect your lien claim. And then to take it a step further, there are differences when it comes to commercial private projects as compared to residential private projects, because the timing in which you have to send your pre-lien notices and perfect your lien affidavit by recording it in the real property records, those are different deadlines. So I'm gonna briefly hit on the residential because the steps are the same, but the timing requirements are different. But just kind of throughout this presentation, keep in mind that the focal point is on commercial private projects and the steps you need to take in order to perfect your lien so that you have a claim as against the project owner. Okay, so again, focused on commercial private projects in Texas. Another key thing to keep in mind is that there were a lot of changes to Chapter 53 of the Texas Property Code to streamline the lien perfection project. And the reason that is so important is because there are what I call old lien laws and what I call new lien laws. Today's presentation is going to be about the new lien laws because in large part, projects are not going to fall quite as often under the old liens anymore. However, if you do find yourself working on a project that you know began pre-January 1st of 2022, and this is just an extended project, maybe it was delayed for some reason, but you know that project started in 2021 or before, you're going to want to make sure and reach out to me or reach out to SunRay to make sure that you're operating under the right lien laws, whether that be the old lien laws or the new lien laws. So the new lien laws, the statute that streamlined the lien perfection process, applies to projects where the original contract, that being the contract between the project owner and the general contractor, was entered into January 1st of 2022 and thereafter. And so that's why I make that distinction of projects starting in 2021 versus projects starting January 1st of 2022 and thereafter. So again, today's presentation, commercial private projects and projects that fall under these new lien laws. All right, so jumping into how to perfect your statutory lien. There are primarily 4 key steps you need to follow. The first one being you're sending out your pre-lien notice with the required information and on time and in the proper format to the right people. Then you're going to need to go on to step number 2, recording your lien affidavit and sending your notice of your recorded lien affidavit as step number 3. And then if perfecting your lien, going through steps 1 through 3, does not get you paid, the last thing you're going to need to make sure to do to perfect your claim against that owner is to go ahead and file suit to foreclose on your lien. So I'm going to walk through each one of these steps. So starting with step number 1, the pre-lien notice. There's a lot of elements that go into this. So what is the pre-lien notice? The new lien laws under the statute provide a form for the lien notice in Texas, and that is up here on the screen. So I've put up here the notice of claim for unpaid labor and materials and the elements that need to be included within that notice, which includes a warning as well. And so very easy to comply with. If you have outstanding contractual retainage that you're going to need to send a pre-lien notice for, there's one additional element that needs to be included, which is the amount of the outstanding contractual retainage. And that is actually a separate form, but it can largely be combined into one form if you do have outstanding contractual retainage in addition to your unpaid labor or materials. Okay, so who needs to send the pre-lien notice out? So the entities that need to send the pre-lien notice is really going to depend on your upstream contractual relationship. So pre-lien notices are mandatory for all subcontractors, but are not required for an original contractor. And the original contractor is going to be any person contracting with the owner directly, either through the owner itself or through the owner's agent. Those are going to be the original contractors, not required to send pre-lien notice. So that includes your original contractor or potentially some sort of design professional, an engineer or an architect who is in direct contractual relationship with the project owner. Required to send a pre-lien notices are all subcontractors. And so that's any person who furnishes labor or materials to an original contractor or to a subcontractor of any tier. So this is going to, cover your subcontractors, your first tiers, your second tiers, your materials suppliers, vendors, those sorts of entities on the project. So just as a visual, everyone here on the screen highlighted in red are going to be required to send the pre-lien notice to perfect your lien. Who has to receive the pre-lien notice? So in all cases, all notices, they need to go to the owner and to the original contractor. But as a general practice tip, if you do find yourself as a second tier subcontractor or someone well down the chain, I always recommend just go ahead and send it to all of the upstream parties to alert them all of your outstanding payment. The more people involved and are aware of your payment problems, the better, in order to get the conversation started about why is this subcontractor not getting paid. Okay, when do you need to send the pre-lien notice by? You need to send the pre-lien notice by the 15th day of the third month after the materials or labor were provided to the project. And so it's important to note that it runs from the date in which the materials or labor were provided, so when the work was performed, as opposed to the date in which you submit your invoice. Those might occur in 2 different months, meaning that your deadline would be two different times, but it's going to run from when the work was actually performed, or looking back at the date of delivery of the materials to the project site. That's your date from which you need to calculate the 15th day of the third month. And then just to reiterate, this is on the commercial private projects, right? So on the residential private projects, you're going to have an even shorter deadline as a subcontractor to send your pre-lien notice, which is going to be the 15th day of the second month after the labor or materials were provided. And so those residential projects can be real tough for subcontractors to make sure that they are acting timely in order to get out their pre-lien notices to perfect their lien claims. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about a hypothetical here on the commercial private project. So say you're a second-tier subcontractor who provided materials to the project, and you provided the materials in various different days throughout the months of April, May, and June. It's now July, and you haven't been paid in some months. And so based on this hypothetical, when is the date in which you're going to need to send your pre-lien notice in order to make sure you perfect your lien claim for all outstanding work performed? The date is going to be the 15th day of the third month from April, because April is the earliest time in which you performed work, you provided the materials to the project, and have not gotten paid for that April work. So you're going to want to send it by July 15th. And of course, that July 15th notice should encompass the outstanding amounts for work performed in April, May, and June. And so you'd have satisfied, the requirement to send out an August 15th notice for May outstanding work, or the September 15th deadline to perfect your pre-lien notice for June outstanding work, because you provided it all within that July 15th pre-lien notice. And again, on the residential side, you'd have an even shorter time frame. You'd need to send a pre-lien notice by June 15th for April outstanding work. Okay, so how do you send the pre-lien notice? So by statute, you're going to want to make sure to send your pre-lien notice out by certified mail, return receipt requested. And this is because by law, once you deliver your pre-lien notice to the United States Postal Service with a certified mail receipt, that is deemed delivery under Texas law. So regardless of whether or not USPS loses it, or for whatever reason it never reaches its intended destination, the statute provides that it has been deemed delivered. So very important that you send it out certified mail. I also recommend, as a general practice tip, to also send it via FedEx or UPS, just because those private services tend to be faster, and it's very critical in terms of timing in getting your pre-lien notice in the hands of the owner. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that's important here in a little bit. Another important rule of thumb that I generally like to follow is you're sending these notices to the last known address for both the owner and to the general contractor. And if I can find a last known address that's not a PO box, I like to do it that way, because generally speaking, the certified mails and any sort of FedEx or UPS delivery that requires signature largely they can't deliver to a PO box, given that they're needing a signature. And so if you could find a last known address that's not a PO box, that's ideal. If you can find a PO box and another one, send it to both. You know, there's never too much notice in my mind. Also, general rule of thumb, go ahead and keep a copy of your white receipt as well as the signed green card that hopefully comes back from the recipient, just for your records, and in case it does end up leading to having to file a foreclosure lawsuit on your lien claim, it'll be really great to have those receipts and the green cards. Okay, so moving on to step number 2, you've done everything you've needed. You've sent your pre-lien notice to the general contractor and to the owner. Step number 2, if that hasn't assisted you with getting paid, is going to go ahead and record your lien affidavit. So there's a number of items that are required to be included within the lien affidavit. I'm not going to go through the laundry list of things, but here they are up on the screen. And it is an affidavit, so it's going to need to be signed and notarized by the claimant. When does the lien affidavit need to be recorded by? This one, the lien affidavit needs to be recorded by the 15th day of the 4th month after the claimant's work is completed. So this is a little bit different in terms of, you know, the calculation of the time, because it's running from the completion of claimant's work. So as a subcontractor, if your work is completed in the middle of the project, you're going to have 15th day of the 4th month after that work is completed. If you're the general contractor, you're going to have until the 15th day of the 4th month after the final completion of the project to go ahead and get your lien recorded. So going back to my hypothetical here, where you have your April, May, and June work performed, haven't been paid, you sent out your pre-lien notice by June 15th covering the April, May, and June outstanding work. You're going to want to get your lien affidavit recorded no later than October 15th, running from the last date of work performed. So in June, 15th day of the 4th month is going to be October 15th. Now, again, notably, this is for commercial private projects. On the residential side, you're going to have a shorter time frame of getting your lien affidavit recorded by the 15th day of the 3rd month after completion of your work. Where does the lien affidavit need to be recorded? It needs to be recorded in the real property records of the county in which the property of the project is located. And so that is, in Texas, there's a lot of different counties, and there's a lot of different hoops that different counties require in order to get your lien affidavit recorded. I'm always happy to assist with that process because, you know, Harris County, Travis County, Bexar County, they're all going to have e-recording abilities. Some of these, you know, more remote counties in Texas haven't familiarize themselves with electronic recording capabilities. So sometimes you have to send in the original signed lien affidavit to the county clerk in order to get it recorded. So every county's procedures are a little bit different there. All right, so you've done everything you needed to send out your pre-lien notice, and then you've recorded your lien affidavit in the real property records. Now you need to send your notice of recorded lien affidavit in order to fully perfect your lien. So to who does this notice of recorded lien affidavit need to be provided to? It needs to go again to the owner and to the general contractor, but to the extent you're a second tier or lower tiered subcontractor, I just recommend going ahead and sending the notice to all of the upstream parties of your recorded lien affidavit. When does the notice need to be sent by? It needs to be sent within 5 days of recording the lien affidavit. My general rule of thumb is to always go ahead and just send it out on the same date that you record your lien. It doesn't need to attach the, county clerk stamped recorded version. You can always just send the copy that's executed with the notice to the general contractor and to the owner on the same date that you submitted the lien affidavit for recording, and it needs to be within 5 days. Previously, under the old laws, there was no sympathy for whether or not that 5th day fell on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. Now, the calculation of time under the new lien laws are to provide a little bit more grace in extending the deadline to the next day that's a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. But as a general rule of thumb, my practice tip is to never to delay on any of the pre-lien notices or the notice of recorded lien affidavit or recording your lien affidavit, because there's no harm in doing any of these steps early. There's only harm in failing to meet these deadlines, and they are very, very strict deadlines when interpreted by Texas courts. And so you really have to make sure that you don't miss them. And so, generally speaking, if the 15th happens to fall on a Sunday, I'll go ahead and do it by the 13th, that Friday before, just to make sure that there's no issue there. And again, there's no harm in doing it early. If you happen to get paid, then great. You can always release that lien. You just can't go back in time to perfect it timely. Okay. So we've gone through steps 1 through 3 to get your lien perfected, your lien claim as against the owner. So what are the available claims to you now that you have your perfected lien? So you have your claim against the contracting entity for non-payment, right? So that's your common breach of contract claim. If there's no formal agreement, other equitable claims such as quantum merit, unjust enrichment, those sorts of things. And then your perfected lien affidavit gives you the claim against the owner. However, the owner's liability is limited, and it's limited to 2 sets of funds. Their liability is to reserve funds and to trapped funds. So let's talk a little bit more about what each of those liability funds are. So the reserved fund is a fund that the owner is required to retain throughout the life of the project from the general contractor. And the amount of the reserved fund by statute is 10% of the original contract price. And so in the vast majority of projects, the owner tends to withhold about 10% of every single invoice that the general contractor submits. And so, it builds up the reserve fund over the life of the project. And the owner is required to withhold these funds until 30 days after the contract is completed. So in order to perfect a lien against the reserved fund, you're going to need to send your pre-lien notice in the time frame in which we've talked about, and you're going to need to record the lien affidavit by the 30th day after the project is completed, terminated, or abandoned. And the reason I mention this and it's so critical is because you're going to want to make sure that you might be thinking, Emily told me 10 minutes ago that I had 4 months to get my lien on file, but now you're telling me I need to make sure and get it on file within 30 days of project completion. And that's right, because you want to make sure that you preserve your right to the reserved fund as one of the things that the owner is liable for. And so you're going to want to be cognizant, if you're a subcontractor or a supplier performing work towards the end of the project, you want to make sure and send out your pre-lien notice and record your lien affidavit within 30 days of complete project completion, just to make sure that the owner does not release those reserved funds to the general contractor without setting aside money to satisfy your lien claim. All right, so number 2, the trapped funds. I see that we're kind of running over here, so I'll talk about this pretty quickly, but the trapped funds are funds that the owner pays to the general contractor after receipt of a pre-lien notice without withholding funds sufficient to satisfy the amount claimed in the pre-lien notice. And so this ties back to why I mentioned it's really important to get your pre-lien notice in the hands of the owner as soon as possible, because this can be, really critical to making sure that you get it there before owner releases funds to the general contractor, so that you have the opportunity to quote unquote trap those funds in the hands of the owner. Okay. Now, finally, step number 4, if perfecting your lien affidavit does not assist in getting you paid, you have to file suit to foreclose on your lien claim, which means filing a lawsuit against the owner. When do you need to do this by? You need to make sure and file your suit within 1 year after the last day that you were eligible to file a lien affidavit. And that's certainly something that I can assist you with. We want to make sure, as soon as it's evident that the lien has not assisted in getting you paid, we go ahead and start that process of doing what we can to try to get you paid without litigation, but otherwise going ahead and getting your claim on file. And with that, I will turn it back over to Jesse.
Well, thank you, Emily. That was amazing. You went through a lot of information and did it really nicely. So thanks for giving us all those little nuggets of information to kind of be on the lookout for and to help us along. I do have a question that was sent in. It says, can a lien be filed on a homestead in Texas?
So yes and no. That's kind of a complicated question, but generally speaking, yes, there can be a lien filed on a homestead in Texas.
Okay. All right. Well, if you have further further questions about that, you can always reach out to either myself or to Emily, and we will be happy to kind of expand upon that if needed be. All right. And then can I, so if I am, the other question, I'm sorry, the other question that was added on here was, if I am doing work on a common area in a condo building as a sub, can I file the lien against the condo association or the individual unit owners?
So it's going to largely depend on who hired the general contractor to perform this work that ultimately got subbed out. Who is the project owner in the circumstance? Is it the condominium owner itself, or is it the tenant that is leasing this particular condo, who hired their general contractor to do renovations or whatever it may be, who hired the subcontractor? So again, I'm sorry, my answer is going to be, it depends on your situation, and I'd need more information as to who are the upstream parties in order to kind of evaluate, is this something that you might be able to assert your lien as against the condominium owner or just the tenant?
Okay, perfect. And listen, while if you're ever sending in your notices through SunRay, we also will do some of that research for you and figure out who actually needs to be notified and noticed on these projects.
Just one other
Yeah.
thing. I mean, if there's any concern there, again, my general rule of thumb is in terms of sending your pre-lien notice and alerting everybody, I like to, more notice is better. So if you're concerned about who do I need to send notice to, there's a condominium owner as well as a tenant, well, send it to all of them. It might be different in terms of actually perfecting your lien affidavit and recording that in the real property records and who you assert the lien against. But for notice purposes, go ahead and send it to everybody about your payment issue.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily. All right. So if anyone does think of a question that wasn't addressed, please feel free to reach out. We will be sure to answer any questions for you. Emily, can you go to the next slide for us, please? All right, so who is ready to win a gift? We are testing your knowledge. If you guys can answer these questions correctly in the chat, we'll go ahead and send you guys a little prize. So here are the questions. Let's see what you guys know. I know, Emily, you talked about some of this. So in Texas, who must send a residential notice letter to owner and original contractor to trap funds monthly after the 2 months on a residential project? And then the other question is on a commercial project, when is the deadline to file a Texas affidavit of mechanics and materialmen's lien? So if you think you know those answers, go ahead and put them in the chat for us and we'll send you over a little gift. Can you go to the next slide for me, please?
Sure.
All right, so here are some of SunRay's resources to help you guys stay organized, know your deadlines, and secure your rights. Go ahead and scan that QR code to access these incredible resources. We've got deadline calculators, project information sheets, all the lien laws, and everything to kind of help you sort through it. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide for me, please. So we have a new service available that SunRay is offering. It's SR Receivables. We'll be handling your collections for you. We're here to help get you guys paid. And go ahead and switch to the next one. Wonderful. All right, on this slide, please, if you don't mind, scan that QR code, give us a review on Google. We appreciate all your feedback that you can give us, and it helps us get this information out to more contractors and suppliers like yourselves. All right, next slide, please. All right, and with that, that is all we have for you guys today. Thank you again to everyone that attended. We hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you again, Emily. You are incredible, and I hope you all have a wonderful and sunny day. Thanks again, everyone.